Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, March 11th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about the hardest vegetables to grow, because we did the easiest yesterday, competition from community gardens, and where to put a garden in the first place. So let's do it. All right, well, happy Tuesday, everyone. The weather is bananas here. I hope it is going as well for you as it is for us, wherever you are listening to this. There will be 2 days this week that will be almost 80 degrees, so like 26.6 Celsius, which, again, is not real. It's a test. There will still be one good March cold snap coming up. Worst case scenario is that we don't get that March cold snap or even one in April, and everything just stays on a relatively normal schedule. I'm good with that. It's better safe than sorry. So yesterday I discussed the easier crops to grow, and today I thought I would break down some of the harder crops to grow. Hard is, of course, like easy is, relative. Does hard mean that it just takes more work? Does hard mean that it takes a lot of know-how for a particular crop? Does hard mean that the timing has to be perfect? Well, for these crops, it will be largely a combination, but also with the acknowledgement that with experience and a good approach, any hard crop can become significantly easier in time. So let's start with arguably, I think, like the hard crop that everybody wants to grow, which is carrots. Carrots are a hard crop for beginners for two main reasons. They are slow to germinate, so the weed control and moisture management have to be on point. If the seeds dry out, the germination rates will tank. If weeds outrun the carrots, you will get little to no carrots, and they will be a mess to harvest. So that ranks pretty high. And of course, I've done lots of info on carrots and will continue to, because carrots are hard to grow and fun to grow and delicious. So that's a weird trifecta, but more info on carrots in due time. Next for me is summer lettuce. Spring and fall lettuce, easy. Summer lettuce, opposite. Don't need to go into too much detail on that now, but every little step of the lettuce growing process has to be done right in the summer to successfully grow lettuce out of season or in warmer climates in general. In fact, basically anything quote unquote out of season is going to move it up on the difficulty level. Like if you're trying to push your tomato production to beat the market, your greenhouse management has to be really dialed in. Then you have to know how and when to plant it, how to protect it from frost and pests, plus what to do if you get aphids or potato beetles or whatever. Also, if you're growing something from scratch, like you're growing, out of seedlings from seed, that also raises the level of difficulty of basically any crop you're growing. Greenhouse management in some ways is somewhat of a different skill than gardening, even if they are related. Trellises generally raise the level of difficulty a bit for me as well. Cucumbers, peas, certain beans. It isn't that these crops are necessarily hard to grow, it's more that they are hard to contain. Of those, I find legumes like pole beans and peas easier than cucumbers. Cucumbers are tough for the pests and diseases, and so I have them pretty high on my list for difficulty, especially when trellised. What I find is that cucumbers generally rock and roll that first year in a new garden, but by the second year, they are much needier. That whole squash and cucurbit family is kind of in the medium hard category, really, with zucchini and squash arguably on the easier side of those, as I mentioned yesterday. Back to the cucumbers for a second, though. Basically, anything grown intensively in a greenhouse where space is limited and pruning is involved is going to rank pretty high on hardness, if that's a sentence. So tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, eggplants. Eggplants are actually relatively medium hard to grow in general because, unlike their cousin the pepper, they are highly susceptible to flea beetles, which will strip them clean of their leaves in a matter of days. Eggplants need to be covered in the first few weeks of their lives after transplanting until they begin to flower, even in the greenhouse when they're seedlings, which can make it difficult to deal with watering. Like if you're watering that tray, you have to remove the insect netting every time you want to water them. And more than once, I have removed the insect netting on a tray of eggplant and with it an eggplant plant itself. Of course, with all this said, if you are driven to grow a certain crop because you would love to eat it or one day you want to sell it, try. That's the only way you will start to learn how to produce it and make it become easier. Just because something is hard doesn't mean it's not worth trying, and it can't be made easier. Because what is hard to me in my context here in Kentucky, Zone 6B, or with my personality and patience, may not be so hard for you. And if you want to grow some dang artichokes or whatever, give it a shot. Yellow, as they say. Not to be confused with yellow, which I think is cowardly. kind of the opposite. So what about the missing crops? Garlic, for instance, is a relatively easy one that I kind of just forgot yesterday. I would throw that in there. It grows at a time with less weed competition, so like over winter, and with a little mulch, it is basically a plant it and forget it crop. You do that in the fall, and then you just harvest it in the late spring, early summer. You're good to go. Green onions are slightly harder just for the amount of work to make them profitable, but they are generally an easy enough crop to grow, as are chives, in fact, for a perennial. Kale is probably on the medium hard side just for the pest potential, whereas chard, spinach, and beets are almost on the easy side of the scale. Decent beginner crops, with chard being perhaps an underrated one of those. Anyhow, no idea if that was fun or interesting or not, but I like a good challenge. In this case, a topic about challenging crops. And so I look forward to what crops you all find to be tough. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. And up next, we're going to talk about community gardens and their symbiosis or lack thereof with market gardens. Maybe. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnwah Greenhouses. Harnwah Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnwah Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Harnwah is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Learn more at harnwah.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Eric Iverson, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, I am recently retired and intend to settle into a new lifestyle that is a mix of community and backyard gardening. More particularly, I'm now in a position where I can more or less devote myself to my own garden and contribute my time and potentially materials/infrastructure support to a community garden, i.e. providing compost, installing an irrigation system, setting up a cleaning station with water reclamation and the like. While I'm sure there's plenty of room for both community and market gardens, it also occurs to me that in some respects they would be competitive, especially if the community garden was designed to and was capable of producing beyond the immediate needs of its members. What experiences, advice, and thoughts, if any, do you have at the fringes between community and market gardens? Thanks." End quote. All right, fun and interesting question here, Eric. Thank you. It's funny. Hannah and I often discuss what will be the ultimate fate of our farm when we decide to hang it up, if a kid doesn't want to take it over. And turning it into a community garden has been batted around more than a few times. Now, our farmland is incredibly hard to farm for the high water table, drainage, clay, etc. So that may be more cruel than helpful, but it's an idea that we've had and like the idea of. Now, I've seen and heard of community gardens having booths at farmers markets or having farm stands before, but rarely does it come up as a significant form of competition for market gardeners. I'm not saying it's impossible, but generally speaking, market gardeners are specialty growers growing consistent, difficult crops, building customer bases and really dialing in everything from marketing to display to production. So the casual grower who just wants to sell their excess would probably not register much to the average market gardener unless they came with a boatload of tomatoes and undercut everyone at market on price, which would not make the community gardeners any friends. So my advice, if the idea is to create a pathway for those growers to sell excess produce, is to just encourage them to be mindful of appropriate pricing etiquette at market, keeping in mind that for the market farmers, this is not a hobby farm, but their livelihood, and they can't drop their prices and survive to compete with growers who don't have to make a living from what they sell. Honestly, this becomes a greater issue with hobby farmers who just have the money to start a farm but don't really need or care to make a profit from it, and potentially nonprofit farms whose costs are often highly subsidized, creating an unfair competitive edge compared to privately owned and operated farms. It is also not necessarily competition in the sense that if more people are growing their own food, fewer people are buying it from farmers. That doesn't so much happen. As a farmer, I always encourage people to grow their own food, at least a little bit, because one, I can't grow everything and don't really want to. Two, the crops that make us money are usually the harder crops to produce, like summer lettuce. So most people are usually still supporting us, even if they are growing some of their own tomatoes and such. And three, home gardeners help create a greater appreciation for what we do, which is never a bad thing. So absolutely, there is plenty of room for community gardens. In fact, I would love to offer some space for refugee gardeners and others in the future. And maybe that would open up a chance to Skillshare and learn about their techniques and food cultures, let them use my tools, that sort of stuff. I would love to provide people with access to soil who live in apartments or just can't afford land or even a yard. There is such a garden organization that I got to visit last year in Louisville. I think it was last year. Actually, it could have been 2 years ago. I don't know. All blends together anymore. Anyway, it was called Common Earth Gardens, and they offer refugee farmers from several different countries where they often had land to grow food back home, and now they don't have anywhere to grow anything. So they offer them a space, like their own plot, to grow food, which I think is super cool. And I do believe they sell some of it. So that's a cool service. And that organization kind of gives those members a small parcel to grow on. And just seeing the different agricultural techniques they were using was very neat. Lots of different interplantings and field setups. The health benefits for the individual, for the host, for the community, in every sense of the word, have the potential to be profound here. So I love your idea, and I hope you pursue it. We need more gardeners, community or otherwise, for sure. Anyway, thanks again. And up next, where to put a garden in the first place. Yeah, be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Sow Right Seeds. Sow Right Seeds is an heirloom seed company that offers fresh, high-quality, open-pollinated seeds. They have a great selection on their website of over 400 varieties, along with a planter's library with tips for growing. They offer cover crops and bulk packs of seed for sustainable home gardening. The instructions on the back of their packets have all the information you need to get started. Go to Sow Right Seeds, that's S-O-W, and use my discount code NOTILL for 15% off your order. That's sowrightseeds.com. All right, enjoy the show. All right, so if you were starting a garden for the first time this year, I figured I would go through some of the key things to consider when placing it, because I see a lot of new gardens this time of year, and I'm always curious why people place them where they do, especially when the garden is like hundreds of feet from their house. It's like a gift to a local deer, which it could be. I don't know, maybe that's a local tradition. Obviously, you can get extremely nerdy about garden placement, take a permaculture design course, all that stuff. But let's just assume you'd like to grow a small amount of food, or or start dabbling in vegetable production to see if it's right for you. Or heck, maybe you just got a new property and are ready to start gardening for real and are looking for some good advice. This will be applicable across the board. First, though none of these are necessarily more or less important than any of the others, gardens need just about as much sunlight as you can possibly get them. It's easier to add shade than it is to take it away in most cases. Like those buildings or your neighbor's trees are probably not going anywhere. So full sun is important if at all possible, but if not, you will need to find absolutely as much sun as you can. In the summer, the sun will travel more or less directly overhead, while in the spring and fall, it will be lower in the sky, just kind of going across the sky to the south. So if you have structures to the south, east, and or west of you, including wooden fences, that could obstruct the sunlight coming in on the shoulder seasons. The north side of a yard is typically the preferred if structures could play a role. You can also map the area and go outside once in the afternoon, midday, and in the morning to see where the light is striking and not striking to make that placement call. Flat ground is preferred, but if it's between a flat place and that floods and slight slope that doesn't flood, the slope is probably going to be the better, safer option. Next, again, there's no particular order here, is water access. You will almost certainly need some amount of water for vegetable production, if only to water plant starts or to water your plants in. And if there's not water there, setting up water in an area can be expensive. So it's If you have that option, take it. Another deciding factor is proximity to your house. I hate seeing gardens several hundred feet away from where someone lives. Out of sight, out of mind, right? More often than not, those gardens are weeds in June and then mowed by July because they simply do not get the requisite attention. You're not walking by them every day. You're having to go out of your way to visit them. Or they are ravaged by deer and other pests who have no fear of getting near them because they're not near your house. If it's an aesthetics thing for small growers, try to consider how you could work the garden into your landscaping. Then you're killing two birds with one stone, though please don't kill birds with anything if you can help it. Birds rule and they're already kind of struggling. But you can kind of do your landscaping and vegetable garden simultaneously, which is sweet. A big one for me would also be drainage. I've learned this lesson the very, very hard way. If you're in a wet area or region, do not place the garden in the wettest spot. Wherever you plan to plant your gardens, do a percolation test. There are plenty of demos for that online to see what kind of drainage you're dealing with. No floodplains. Seriously, yes, the best soil is often in a floodplain because it floods. And when it floods, it deposits rich silt there through a flood. So if you put your garden in a floodplain, you risk losing your gardens and then having them deposited on some other floodplain, making it even richer. It's like a cycle, but not a cycle you want to be a part of. Another thing might be electricity, depending on what your plans are. If you are wanting to build out a wash pack shed and a cooler and automated greenhouses, etc., for example, then having good access to or a good plan for electricity should be high on your list. If you can at all avoid lawns or areas with Bermuda grass, that would be ideal. But if you don't have a choice, then you will either have to tarp that area for a year or build raised beds with barriers beneath them because things like Bermuda grass will grab a hold of your garden and never let go. You can manage Bermuda grass out of your gardens. It will just take all of your time. So anyway, what would you all suggest for someone looking for advice on where to place a garden? Let us know, and I'm going to wrap it there. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Gasper Mestus. What's up, Gasper? That's a good fun name. Cedric Reed, William Wiley Modrow, Richea Grant, wish I started 20 years ago. Dwight Yoder, Honey Works, Lynn Tompkins, Rebecca S., Mark Ravenel, Doug Wilkes, Lee Shelley, Brian McCarthy, Larry Shepard, Martian Cindy, DP, Kat Brannigan, Little Row Farms, Hank Zecca, Ashley Sharp, Jill Crosby, Scott Roser, Norskgard Farm, Laura Britton, Alex Savatsky, Alberto Diaz, Peter Broad, Jason Ruel, Earth Care Farmer Jane Murner, Derek Page, Meredith Light from Granite Springs Farm, Grown Up Farm, Bob and Ann Patton of Hexhamshire Organics, Jared Kirst at Rivendell Farm, Steve Larson, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, and Jen Lawrence. So obviously that's our monthlies, right? Big group. And this week, the monthlies are doing a good old fashioned barn raising, or they were. And that was the goal. And at the end of the first night, there was like a flash flood, right? And it washed out a giant moat around where they were building. And then they all sort of realized almost simultaneously that they could build a castle instead of a barn. And so they proceeded to build a castle instead of a barn. And this became a trend, and it took off nationwide. And, instead of filling the moats with like crocodiles, right? They filled them with like productive, beautiful aquatic plants that they could sell at the local market, and a U-fish operation. So a little value adding there. I like that. Castle Farms. Who knew? Thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you tomorrow for Wednesday. Yeah. Bye.